I am bringing up Anna Schafer. She has been in, her first film was Father of Invention, Trials of Kate McCall, and also The Whistleblower. So Anna, the star of Elizabeth Blue.
Thank you. Oh, wow, it's bright up here.
It's bright up here, I know. So
Thank you so much.
we're gonna do like a 20 to 30 minute Q&A.
Great.
And I do have a question from the audience, but for now, let's just start simple. How did you get involved with this specific project?
So I got a script, read it, cried my eyes out, and then the next, I think it was like 2 days after that, I got to go in and audition for Vincent. I learned later on that he wanted an unknown, and he's seen like, I don't know, 100 and something girls. And his husband, Joe Dane, who's the producer, came to him and said, hey, I worked with this girl in Trials of Kate McCall. I think you should see her. So they called me in, and we did 3 scenes. It was the Dr. Bowman scene, the Christmas tree lot scene, and one of a small part from the Tim scene. And Vincent was in the room right away, and he was amazing. And the next day, I got a call that I got the part.
Wow,
Yeah.
nailed it. Because, isn't that great?
Yeah, usually does not happen that way, right? And also, I called my mom after the audition, and she's like, how was it? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I have no idea, because, you know,
Isn't
you walk
that
into
the way that it's very hard to know if you nail it or not?
Yeah, and a lot of times you don't remember. You're like, I don't know if I said the lines right. I don't know if because this thing happens where it's like you're in a vacuum, and then you walk out of the room and you're like, did I do that right? Did I say the lines? Yeah.
It was interesting because we were talking up in the green room and you were talking about auditions. What was the audition? I mean, let's talk. She said these things upstairs that were great, just like how nervous you are about auditions.
Yeah. I get the worst anxiety. And we're talking like, even now I have anxiety, to be completely honest, but we're talking like dry mouth, like my heart rate goes up. I sometimes get a little blotchy, like my skin turns colors. It's great for an audition. Yeah, well, it was great for this role, right? So normally like these voices in your head that are so negative, they're like, you're not good enough, you're gonna forget your lines. You kind of try to mute them, you try to shut them off. But for this role, I had to raise that volume and live in that really negative, like, you're just not good enough place.
How hard was that? How did you, since obviously you're someone that has some feelings like this or some anxiety, how did you bookend it? How did you go from being on set to going home? What did you do to frame it?
We shot in 15 days, the whole film. And honestly, for 15 days, I kind of really stayed in it and lived it. The only time that I was able to shut it off was when I got home. My daughter was 2 at the time, and I pushed her bedtime to see her every night. And that moment where I rocked her to sleep and sang Baby Beluga, like, I had to be mommy. So I couldn't really afford to bring that to her. And then honestly, the second she fell asleep, I would pass out of like pure exhaustion and then wake up in that state of mind again.
So can you talk a little bit about how you prepared? We have a question from the audience about mental illness, and I'm going to kind of skim it, do it a little bit more concisely, but it's a serious societal problem. How did you prepare so that your research, that it wasn't a stereotypical or cliched performance?
Yeah, so I don't know if all of you know this, but this story is based on the writer-director Vincent Sabella. He has schizophrenia. This is based in a period in his life in 2010 where all of his medications plateaued and failed, and he started hallucinating every day, nonstop. And every hallucination you see on screen is something that he has experienced. The raccoons he has been seeing since he was little. The character of Tim, he has seen since he's 14. And he actually looks like that. He's like very well-dressed, but really vicious. Really, really vicious. The train scene happened exactly like that at Vincent and Joe's house. So basically everything that you see, every hallucination, every noise is something that he has lived through. And all the medication is based on his medications that he's on. So it was interesting because I had him. I was technically playing my writer director, and I had him for inspiration. I had him for just any kind of information that I needed. What is it like to have schizophrenia? What is it like to hear these voices? What is it like to see these things? I had him, and we had 3 months of prep, which was amazing because we really got to know each other on a very deep level. And then I got to work with a real Dr. Bowman, who's actually Vincent's doctor, who we didn't change the name, or they didn't change the name.
It's wild how much of it is really scraped from his life and heart.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of mind-blowing just how courageous he is to tell this story, because I think a lot of people either don't know what schizophrenia is or are really scared of it. So it was a very important project to be a part of. And then, just so spending time with Vincent and having these sessions with Dr. Bowman.
So can you take us through like one of the scenes, like how you internalized it, and also how you transformed it from what the director said his experience was to your own character's experience?
I could give you a very specific example.
I like specific examples.
So there's this scene in the film, the train scene, that when I read the script, I couldn't imagine it. I couldn't see what it was going to look like. And I really couldn't make it personal. I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. Like, I don't know what this looks like. And he kept saying to me, don't worry, it'll come. And it was during the chemistry reads. We were sitting on the couch waiting for the next guy to come. And Vincent sat up and looked at me and he said, do you hear that? And I was like, yeah, I think it's like the air conditioning next door. And he kind of looked right past me and he was like, do you hear that? Do you hear that? He gets up and he starts pacing the room. Now, I've never seen an episode before. So he starts pacing the room and he's looking for this noise that only he is hearing. He's like knocking things off the shelf, opening doors, and it's becoming more frantic and more violent. And so Joe, his husband, gets up, instantly knows what's happening. He grabs him. He's like, Vin. He pushes him off. He's like, get off of me, starts running. And then Joe gets the medication, Saffris, which is in the film, puts it under his tongue. And within like a minute, Vincent goes really still. They leave the room. And 10 minutes later, they come back and Vincent is Vincent again.
Wow.
And he looked at me and he said, did I scare you? And I was like, yeah. I was completely paralyzed because you don't know what to do. You've never seen this before. And it was quite terrifying. But then I looked at him, I said, but do you want some good news? And he's like, what's the good news? I'm like, I get the train scene now. It's literally, you just acted it out for me, basically. And so the day that we shot that scene, I took what I saw that day and how I felt in watching it and just used that. And also took what Dr. Bowman said to me about, I asked him how I could make schizophrenia relatable to myself. Like, how can I understand it? And he said, have you ever had a nightmare? And at the time, my daughter was 2, so I had these really awful, vivid nightmares about something really terrible happening to her. I'd wake up crying, I'd run into her room, check on her, and then run back and walk back and say, oh, she's sleeping, she's fine, this was just a nightmare. So he said, imagine that happened while you were awake. That there was no way of telling yourself that was just a nightmare.
Right.
And so that really hit hard for me. So using that and then seeing Vincent's episode, it just kind of gave me that knowledge and that energy to just do that scene. We did it twice, and I honestly don't remember. I was in the moment, and I felt like I was really living it, and we did it twice, and they were like, we have it. Great.
And what other things did you do for this character? Accents, physical things, or,
Vincent and I spoke a lot about that, and I didn't do any accent. I was me. But besides obviously spending a crazy amount of time with Vincent, where every day we were together talking about the role and what her biggest fears were and what his biggest fears were, seeing Dr. Bowman 4 times and having sessions with him. And I read this insanely long book called Surviving Schizophrenia, which was very insightful, but a lot more medical, I guess. And then honestly, it was really about living in this space where you just raise that volume on your negative thoughts and constantly question if where you are, what you're seeing is real or not. And
that seems really difficult on top of the acting to kind of take yourself to such a, is it a dark place or such a just difficult, scary place?
It's a bit of a dark place, a little bit of a scary place, but it's, I think everyone has experienced some form of fear or anxiety or depression or loss. And I think it's just using that and what you have been through and using all those feelings and just making them come to life in those moments. It's not a fun place to live.
How did you in what ways did you break from Vincent's idea of the character and of his experience?
Like I said, I did. I brought a lot of things that were really personal to me. I've been through, you could say, a lot in my life. My parents went through a really bad divorce. I lost a sister. And these are things you don't really want to think about a lot. But in moments like this where you get to act and, bring your craft to the screen, you use those moments, you use those experiences to make every scene feel authentic to you. Because if it doesn't feel authentic to you, if it's not real, if you're not crying real tears over something that breaks your heart, I feel like it's not going to be real.
Did you look at other people's other films to kind of give you a model for this?
I did. I watched The Snake Pit. Have you seen that film?
It's been a while. What is it from is it from the 50s?
From the 50s.
Yeah.
And then I watched Kathleen Quinlan's first film that she did where she plays a schizophrenic, and that's I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. And then I watched, so good, right? And then I watched, why am I blanking? Blue Jasmine, was that what it was called? Right? Was it?
Yeah, with Jessica Lange and Tommy Lee Jones, that one?
No. Yes,
Kate Blanchett one.
Yes,
Blue Jasmine, yeah.
Yes. And
which one am I thinking of? The Blue Sky. Well, I got the color right. Okay, I was close.
You got the color.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, I watched a few films to sort of get a feel for how other people did it and dealt with mental illness.
And you've watched it, yes? You've watched
the film?
Yeah.
Quite a few times.
So because a lot of actors, sometimes they like to watch themselves on screen. Sometimes they're like, I watched it 3 times because I have to, but then, they'll sit through the first 5 minutes and go out to the bar during something like this and then come back.
Yes, so I don't like to watch myself. It's like hearing yourself on voicemail and you're like, oh, do I sound like that?
Right.
But I have seen this film and it's weird because I don't like to watch myself, so that's not fun. But this film makes me really sad. I was there, I was in the scenes, so I know how it ends, but every single time I cry, but in a different place. And the Kathleen Quinlan scenes always, or the last scene just gets me every time. So it's really emotional to watch it because I feel like watching it, I have to relive some of those things and go back to this place. So I try not to watch it too many times.
I understand that. I'm curious, you've done a number of movies. You said you started out in 2009, so you've been doing this for 8 years. But this is your first lead, correct?
Yeah.
So what was that like? I know a lot of actresses who have done supporting roles, and then they get that chance, and how great it is to carry the narrative.
I mean, it was amazing. It was obviously very different because you're on set every single day. You're the first one there, you're the last one to leave, and you're in essentially every scene. It was definitely very new and strange for me, but it was also amazing because you got to, and we also shot in sequence, which was amazing, kind of from start to end. So it was really just like living it and telling the story from beginning to end, and it was incredible.
And when did you decide yourself personally that you were going to be an actress? You were talking about your daughter is 3 and explaining to her what you do. When did you get that? Because they get it, they get it pretty early.
They do. Yeah, she definitely gets it. So I always my mom says I knew from the age 2. She's like, you were such an actress. You were like this little clown. You always put on performances. But I moved from Russia to the States when I was 6. And it was a very scary time.
So your first language is Russian?
Is Russian, yeah. So it was a really scary...
I had no idea.
That's good. Because I've had people like, oh, you could only do Russian characters. And I'm like, really? Are you sure about that? No. But so we moved to the States, and it was a very scary time because my dad stayed, and we didn't know the language. And
where did you move to?
Upstate New York, Spring Valley. Do you remember this? So my grandmother had this little radio that translated one show on TV, and that was All My Children. Yeah.
So that's how you learned about the culture.
I watched it like every single day, and I don't know if I would let my 6-year-old watch All My Children. But my mom had other things on her mind, like finding us schools and making friends and learning the language. So I remember watching All My Children and thinking, oh, that Erica Kane. Like, I want to do, because it seemed so like magical. And even though like I look back at it now and I'm like, oh my God, it's All My Children. But it was so, this world they created and these characters and that drama. And I was like, I think I might want to do that, like for real. And then that kind of evolved into doing theater and acting classes, and now I'm here.
And now you're here. What do you think? What do you think your big transition was from being one of many young women who want to be an actress, and you knowing that it was the thing that you had to do? And what did you do to achieve it?
I was living in New York at the time. It was 2008, and I was engaged to be married. And so I remember coming home to my mom and telling her, I was like, I'm like way too young to be married, A. And B, I was like, I need to move to LA. And she's like, what? I was like, I have to pursue this dream that I've had forever. And like never really did anything about it beyond acting classes. And she was like, okay. Like kind of like, she didn't even understand, like, how are you going to do this? Like, are you going to break off your... So I was like, yep. So the next day I called my fiance and I ended it. And
blew him off.
The next day I went to LA. I didn't know anyone.
So is that something that you would say is a trait of yours? Because talking to you, it doesn't sound like that kind of, that kind of forthright, like, oh, I was at a turning point and I moved forward.
No,
is that something
like, No, it was just this moment where I was like, what am I doing? Like, I've had this, why am I not doing anything about it?
Right.
And I've always had people in my life, like my dad was like, my little girl's not going to Hollywood, like big, scary producers. Like, nobody.
and how true he was.
He was very accurate, by the way. And then my fiance at the time was kind of like, oh, if you have a scene kissing a guy, I'm going to cheat on you, which doesn't sound healthy, right? Looking back on it.
Not very helpful, no.
So it was just this moment I had where I was like, life is short. Like, you need to do what you love and just go for it. So I moved to LA and started meeting people and taking classes. And
what was the first time you kind of kicked the door open a little bit?
Well, the first job I got was Father of Invention. So I feel like that's kicking the door a bit, because I got to work my first set.
And that's where you earned your SAG card, or had you already? Wow.
Yeah. That's where I got my SAG card. So that was an amazing experience because I got to work with so many amazing actors. And then I did The Whistleblower right after, and that was also incredible. My part was tiny, but I got to see like Rachel Weisz and Vanessa Redgrave every day, and that was pretty awesome.
I'm curious. I was talking to Greta Gerwig recently,
Love her.
and she's she's an actress and now a director. She did Lady Bird, and she was talking about different actresses and their methods. What would you say your method? Do you come into a shot to a scene and you try it 7 different ways, or do you really know how you're going to do it and then you feel it through in the moment? How do you work off your other actors?
Yeah, I really just try to stay in the moment. That's like the biggest thing for me, is not to think about it. So first of all, I learn my lines like I right away. That's like the first thing I do, just to get rid of them and to let it be natural. And then I try to be in the moment and make it, like I've mentioned before, make it real to me, whatever that is. To give you an example of that is the raccoon scene, where Puck, the raccoon, was a wonderful actor, and he got to do his scene first, and then they had to send him home because apparently they could be vicious.
Yeah, they can be. They're very
Yeah.
cute, but
Yeah, so he was great. But then he got to go home. And so I had to say goodbye to an empty toilet. Yeah, that was fun. And I couldn't, I knew what I wanted the scene to look like. When I read the script, that scene made me emotional, and I was like, oh, I get it. But then I did it once, and I just wasn't connecting. Like, I was like, okay, I need to make this real for me somehow. And both Joe, the producer, and Vincent know how I work. So I heard them whispering, and they came out. They're like, can we help? I said, sure. So Joe's like, Vincent's going to say action, and I'm going to talk to you until I see you're ready. And I was like, okay, great. It's going to go great. So he says action, and Joe starts talking, and he's like, so I know you have a dog. I know she's 11. And maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in a week, maybe not even in a year.
oh,
He went there. Mean, scary producer in a different way.
yeah.
But they also knew that nothing was
Right.
off limits and that I
Right.
needed to make it personal. So he goes, one day you're going to have to maybe put her down, and you're going to have to look into her eyes and pet her and say, this might be the last time that I'm petting you. And then you're going to have to tell your daughter where Honey is. So right there, that, he stopped talking, and I just, waterworks. I just started I was crying. And that did it for me. I turned to that empty toilet, and I saw my cute little Cavalier King Charles Spaniel looking up at me, and I said goodbye to her. That was me saying goodbye to my dog.
Uh-huh.
And that made it real for me. And that's what I was able to do what I do because of that. I did come home and give her a big hug, and she's still alive, by the way. She's
And you
great.
apologized for
I was
imagining
like,
her
I am
death.
so sorry I killed you in my head.
In my head.
But yeah, it's just about, the method is making things as real as possible to me in the moment.
And looking ahead, what are the things that you'd like to do? We're going to, and what would you say that would inspire a group of actors?
I would say you just read everything. You never know. You really honestly never know where you're going to find your gem, and go for it. Never be afraid to try something, because I was terrified of this role. I was like, I can't do this. This is too scary. This is too big. Don't be afraid ever. And I don't know what's next. I'm kind of really enjoying this journey right now, and I have no idea. I guess we'll see.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you for
much.
coming.
Thank
and thanks
you.
to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation.
Thank you.